What's happened? Beverly asked when Ryan ended the call. They took Sarah and little Ryan, Ryan said. Oh God, Beverly exclaimed. Listen, I need to get home, make some calls, Ryan said. Do what you usually do. Don't tell anyone anything. Okay, honey, she said. I'll just finish a few things here and come right over. We'll get through this, don't worry. Okay, Ryan said. He kissed Beverly and went home. Arriving home, he called Bill. Hello, how are you? Asked Bill. Not good, they took Sarah and little Ryan, Ryan said. Damn it, Bill replied. Any idea where they are going? Yes, Ryan said. I haven't checked, but I have a pretty clear idea. Listen, I need you to contact our old friends, bring them here as quickly as possible. Understood. Got it, old friend, Bill said. I'll contact you. They ended the call and Ryan dialed Jorge's number. Good evening, Jorge replied. What news? Bob just called. Elmer's men captured Sarah and little Ryan, Ryan said. They also killed 2 FBI agents who were guarding them. Damn, Jorge said. Exactly, Ryan said. I contacted Bill. He makes calls. I want you to contact Bob and Bill. I want you to join the team if possible. Do you think they are heading to the camp? Jorge asked. Yes, Ryan said. Okay, I'll contact them and call them back, Jorge said. I have something that might come in handy. They ended the call and Ryan went to his home office, where there was a map of the camp on a whiteboard. He studied the map and began to develop a plan. A few minutes later, Beverly entered the house and stood next to Ryan. What are you planning? She asked. I need to inspect this camp, he said. What? She asked. Are you going there tonight? I need to make sure our information is correct and that they actually took Sarah and Ryan there, Ryan said. I can't do it from here. It's only 2.5 hours away. I could cross Highway 62 here and take that road into New Mexico and end up north of their camp. If this is right, I could be right here, he pointed to a spot on the map, and I could look directly at their camp without attracting attention. What if someone like a neighbor notices you? She asked. The satellite photo I found on the internet shows that no one lives within 10 miles of this place, so I don't think it will be a problem, he said. Why don't you just call the FBI and let them handle it? She asked. Exactly, Ryan said. Because the FBI did such a great job protecting my family. Look, Bev, these people are dangerous, and they don't play by the rules. Me too. They may be expecting the FBI, but they're not expecting me. Besides, they have my family, and I made a promise to Elmer Jenkins. It's time to put an end to this. Should you do this? She asked. I have to, honey, he replied. They have my family. Don't worry, I'll just do some reconnaissance. 2.5 hours there, maybe half an hour there, then 2.5 hours back. It's 8 o'clock in the evening. If you don't hear from me by 11:30 or so, call this number. He handed her Agent Smith's card. Tell him where I am. He'll take care of the rest. Okay, she said. He gave her a .45 caliber pistol. Keep it to yourself, he said. If anyone other than me comes through the door, you know what to do. Aim for the center of the chest and shoot. Okay, she said nervously. He led her to a closet in the hallway, opened the door, and pulled the hidden rope. The floor opened up to reveal a staircase. Then you come down here, lock it behind you, and get out of here. This leads to the shooting range, he said. Understood? She nodded. I understand, she replied. Okay, he said. I need to grab a couple of things, and I'm leaving. He returned to his office and took the backpack he had packed earlier. Beverly went to the kitchen and returned with a thermos full of fresh, hot coffee. He smiled as she handed it to him. Remember that I love you, she said, kissing him deeply. I love you too, he replied, returning the kiss. Don't worry, this is just reconnaissance. I'll call you when I'm on my way back. Don't call me. If Bill, Bob, or Jorge call, tell them to text me. I'll call them back. What if the people who kidnapped your daughter call? What should I tell them? She asked. Tell them I went out for a beer or something, he said. Record a message, write to me, and I'll call you back. Okay, she said. They kissed again and Ryan was on his way. She watched his truck drive down the driveway with tears in her eyes. Please, God, she prayed, save my man and return him to me. Ryan filled both of his truck's tanks in town, as well as the 2 5-liter jerry cans he kept for emergencies. He knew there was a gas station at the intersection of the road and the highway and planned to refill his tanks there, but did not want to take the risk. He continued through town and onto the highway, where he filled the tanks and refilled the thermos. Now the path lay in New Mexico. He followed the road carefully and finally reached his destination. He put the truck in 4-wheel drive and drove down the dirt road for about 100 meters before turning off the engine. He took his backpack and applied camouflage paint to his face. Taking night binoculars, he carefully made his way to the rocks overlooking the camp. With binoculars attached to his head, he scanned the area and noticed that a Learjet was parked at one end of the dirt runway, indicating that the board of directors, along with Sarah and little Ryan, were already there. He scanned the camp itself and noticed that it was surrounded by a high chain-link fence. He must be energized, he thought, seeing the signs attached to the fence. He suspected that the place was surrounded by sensors to detect possible intruders. There was one gate guarded by 2 guards, and he counted 12 other guards patrolling the area. Maybe there are more of them, he thought. Perhaps they are already inside one of the wooden buildings. He studied their movements and took notes on a notepad. As he watched, he saw a woman and a small boy being led into one of the buildings, guarded by an armed guard and a large man whom he assumed to be Elmer. Without a doubt, it was Sarah and Ryan. He marked the building on his notepad. He noticed several other unarmed people walking aimlessly between buildings with no regard for safety. They seemed slightly drunk, and he could hear them laughing and joking, although he couldn't hear what they were saying. Perhaps these were other members of the council who came to the festivities. He took notes on the area and the general layout of the camp, then slowly walked back to the truck. Checking his watch, he realized he had been there for just over 30 minutes. He put everything back and wiped the camouflage paint off his face. He reconnected his smartphone to the truck's Bluetooth so he could use it hands-free, then carefully returned to the road without turning on his headlights. When he got to the road, he turned and drove off without turning on his headlights for about a mile. Luckily, there was enough moonlight to see the road. Feeling that he was out of danger, he called Beverly. "Are you okay?" she asked as soon as she answered the call. "Okay," he said. "I'm on my way back." "So you got what you wanted?" she asked. "Oh, yes," he said. "No problem. What news do you have?" "Yes, Jorge called me. He told me to let you know that they are on their way, and you can call him when it's safe," she said. "They? Who are they?" Ryan thought. He dialed Jorge's number. Bob answered. "Hi, Ryan," he said. "Hi," Ryan replied. "What's happening?" "Well, Jorge, Bill, and I are coming to see you," Bob said. "What? All 3?" Ryan asked. "Yes," said Bob. "Listen, son, this is not a hike in the woods," Ryan said. "I know, Ryan," Bob said, "but they have my family, and I'm not going to just sit around and wait for someone else to do it." Ryan understood how Bob felt, so he decided not to argue over the phone. "We'll talk about this later," Ryan said. "Let me talk to Bill." He heard the phone being passed to Bill. "Yes, boss," Bill said. "Have you contacted the team?" Ryan asked. "Yes, with some of them," Bill said. "I talked to Ian, Buster, Cap, and Jim. They are already on their way to you. Should be there by noon." "Okay," Ryan said. "When do you think you will be there?" "At the rate Jorge is going, I think it will be about 5 in the evening," Bob said. "Damn," Ryan thought. "Jorge is probably driving like crazy." "Okay, see you then," Ryan said. "Be careful." He ended the call and continued driving. He drove to his house, grabbed his gear, and went inside where Beverly was waiting for him. She rushed to him and hugged his neck. "Thank God you're back," she said. "I was so worried about you." He hugged her back and kissed her. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "It was just reconnaissance." "Are they really in the camp, as you thought?" she asked. "Yes," he said. and they have Sarah and little Ryan there. What are you going to do now? She asked. Friends are on their way, he said. I'm going to return them. What? She asked, shocked. Are you crazy? Perhaps, he said. I warned Elmer Jenkins what would happen if he touched my family. You should probably stay here tonight to be safe. Okay, she answered quietly, but I'll have to take care of the chickens in the morning. I'll go with you, he said, just in case. Do you have any deliveries tomorrow morning? There are a few, but they are nearby, she said. Perhaps it would be better for me to go with you, he said. Thank you, but that's not necessary, she replied. I don't think they'll come for me, but I'll take a gun just in case. Take your phone with you, he said. Be careful. If you notice anything suspicious, call me immediately. I promise, she said. They slept restlessly for several hours, then got up. Beverly prepared breakfast while Ryan showered and got dressed. After breakfast, they went to her house and took care of the chickens. Beverly packed eggs for delivery and her .410 caliber shotgun. Can you do me a favor? He asked, taking a $100 bill from his pocket. Of course, she replied. Can you stop at Jerry's on the way back and buy a couple 12 packs of beer and about 10 cigars? He asked. Jerry's was a small country store serving local residents. Are we having a party? She asked. He smiled and shook his head. No, he said. This is a tradition. Okay, she replied. Thank you. And remember, call me if you see anything suspicious, he said. I promise, she replied. I'll let you know when I'm done and on my way back. They kissed, and he watched her drive away. Then he returned to his home and began to study the map. After a while, the phone rang. He looked at the screen and saw that the number was unknown. He wanted to let the call go to voicemail, but decided to answer. Hello, he said. Ah, Mr. Caldwell, came a voice that Ryan immediately recognized as belonging to Elmer Jenkins. You are exactly what I need. What do you want, Jenkins? Ryan asked. I need you to get the feds off my tail, Elmer replied. I'm not in charge of the FBI, Ryan said. And anyway, why should I do this? Because I have your daughter and grandson, that's why, Elmer said. I don't believe you, Ryan replied, although he knew that was not true. Let me talk to them. Okay, Elmer said. Ryan heard movement, then Sarah spoke. Dad? She asked. Are you okay? Ryan asked. And little Ryan? I'm fine, but they drugged Ryan and he's asleep now, she replied. Hold on, princess, he said. I'll take you home soon. Not so fast, Elmer intervened. You have 24 hours to remove the feds, otherwise your beautiful princess will return to you beaten. Do you remember what I told you, Jenkins? Ryan asked. Elmer laughed. What are you going to do? He asked. You're just an old, worn-out, one-eyed mercenary. Better come up with a good argument for your FBI friends, and come up with it fast. You just know, Jenkins, Ryan said. I always keep my promises, so I hope pain is something you like because I'm coming for you. You and what army? Elmer laughed. 24 hours, old man. Do what you have to do. Ryan wanted to say something, but Elmer had already ended the call. He looked at his watch and saw that it was almost 11 a.m. He remembered Bill saying the rest of the team would arrive around noon, so he went upstairs. He pulled a chest out of the closet and opened it. He hadn't used the equipment in about 4 years and wasn't sure if the old uniforms would fit him. He pulled out a folded set of desert camouflage and a pair of worn combat boots. He took off his clothes and put on a black t-shirt and camouflage pants. Taking off his cowboy boots, he put on his combat boots and laced them up, then pulled his pants over his boots. He was surprised that the old trousers still fit him. He grabbed a waist belt and other equipment, then pulled out an old desert camouflage hat and jacket from the chest. He slammed the lid of the chest, then went downstairs. He tossed his jacket and hat onto a chair in his office and examined the equipment. A few minutes later, the phone rang. He looked and saw that the call was from Beverly. Hi, he said when he answered. Everything is fine. Everything is fine, she replied. I hope Coors will do, because that's what I bought. And I bought you cigars. So I'm already on my way back. Thank you for telling me, he said, and I am very grateful to you for this. See you when you arrive. I'm happy, she replied. Love you. And I love you, he said, ending the call. A few minutes later she arrived, and he got out to help her carry everything inside. She looked shocked to see him in camouflage. Are you going to war or something? She asked. Sort of, he said, helping her carry everything into the house. I made a promise to Elmer, and I intend to keep it. What promise? She asked. I promised him a war he couldn't believe if he touched my family, Ryan said, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. What if you get hurt? She asked. Then I will suffer, he replied. This happens. No, she said. I won't let this happen. I can't lose you, especially like this. He has my daughter and my grandson, Ryan said. Besides, I won't be alone. My team is on its way. You mean the other mercenaries you worked with? She asked. Some of them, yes, he replied. At that moment, they heard the characteristic sound of a helicopter approaching the house. Ryan looked out into the yard and saw an olive-colored Vietnam War-era Huey helicopter landing on the spot where he usually set up a shooting range. Well, he said, laughing. What's happened? Beverly asked fearfully. Is Elmer following us? No, he answered. This is the cavalry. Could you prepare dinner? I think the guys will be a little hungry. Of course, she replied. I can make egg salad sandwiches if that's appropriate. Sounds great, he said, kissing her. I'll be back soon. He put on a camouflage hat and walked towards his old comrades, who were already getting out of the helicopter. Jim, you're an old dog, Ryan said, walking up to the man piloting the helicopter. How are you? Where did you get this from? Worked on it for the last 3 years, Jim replied. Well, how do you like it? I'm impressed, Ryan said. Does this thing have any teeth? You bet, Jim said, walking around the front of the car. Ryan noticed the black logo on the front, a clenched fist with an extended middle finger. Ryan laughed. Great addition, Ryan said, pointing to the emblem. Jim laughed. Suitable for my mood most of the time, he replied. Look at this, he said, opening the side door. He pulled back the tarp to reveal an M134 minigun. Do you think this will work? Definitely, Ryan replied. I wanted to install rockets, but it wasn't in the budget, Jim said. So you put it together yourself? Ryan asked. Basically, yes, Jim answered. It took time to collect all the details. Some things had to be returned and the engine needed work. But essentially, it's like new. How much will it cost me? Ryan asked. Jim shook his head. Just pay for the gas, give me a couple of beers, and we'll be even, Jim said. We are comrades. You've saved my life many times, so I feel like I owe you one. Ryan nodded and shook Jim's hand. Thank you, old friend, Ryan said. The 4 men grabbed their gear, and Ryan led them into the house. Guys, this is my friend, Beverly Simons, Ryan said as they entered the kitchen. Beverly, this is Jim Talbot, Ian White, ex-SAS soldier, Charles Torres, we call him Buster, and Mark Hammond. We just call him Cap. This is short for Explosive Cap, as he is well-versed in explosives. Girlfriend, asked Cap. I thought you gave up on women. I gave up until I met Beverly, Ryan replied. He quickly showed them around the house, allowing them to place their gear and use the restroom. So, I'm your friend now? Beverly asked quietly when he returned to the kitchen. Yes, you could say that, Ryan replied, noticing the smile on her face. Do you have problems with this? No, sir, she replied, giving him a kiss. Enough of this, Buster said loudly but good-naturedly, entering the kitchen, causing everyone to laugh. Beverly finished preparing the sandwiches and placed them on the kitchen table, then poured everyone a glass of iced tea. I hope you all like egg salad sandwiches and sweet tea, she said. I love egg salad, madam, Cap replied, taking a bite of his sandwich. Thank you. Please, she replied. Ryan, you better hold on to this woman, Cap said. Anyone who can make an egg salad this good deserves it. I intend to, Ryan replied. They spent the next half hour eating sandwiches and talking. When they finished, Ryan spoke again. "Bill won't be arriving soon, so I can brief you on the situation," he said. "When Bill arrives, we'll discuss the plan." He spent the next hour telling them the whole story since Bob came into his life. "Damn it," Ian said when Ryan had finished. "I agree," Ryan replied. "You made a mistake by letting Jake live," Buster said. "Perhaps," Ryan replied. "I actually thought about killing the bastard, but I changed my mind. If I did that, I would probably end up in jail." "You're right," said Cap, "and there would be 2 witnesses." "How do you cope with this with one eye?" Ian asked. "It's not easy, but I'm training," Ryan replied. "So you can work in the fields?" Ian asked. "I can handle it," Ryan replied. They heard a car drive up to the house. Ryan looked out and saw a dark SUV. He noticed Agent Smith getting out of the car. "Hide your weapon," he said. "I'll deal with this." He walked out of the house and stood on the porch when Agent Smith approached him. "So you heard what happened?" Ryan asked. "Yes," Agent Smith replied. "I thought you were planning something." "And you thought you could stop me, right?" Ryan asked. "I did it your way, and this is what it led to." "You don't understand, Ryan," Smith said. "Do you mind if I call you Ryan?" "Not at all," Ryan replied. "Roger Gillespie, one of the agents guarding your daughter, was a good friend of mine," Smith said. "He was the best man at my wedding, and I was his. His little son is my godson." "So what does the Bureau do?" Ryan asked. "Nothing," Smith replied. "It's all about politics. Everyone is trying to get out of it to save face with politicians in Washington. Night Petroleum is very influential in certain circles. It is said that the president may even issue a general pardon if someone is convicted." "So what do you want from me?" Ryan asked. "I want to join you," Smith replied. "I realize that you are planning something, and I want to help." "I'm not going to arrest anyone," Ryan said. "I don't believe in taking prisoners." "You understand this, right?" "I thought so," Smith replied. "But can you live with it?" Ryan asked. "This isn't my first rodeo, you know," Smith replied. "I was in the Navy before I joined the Bureau. So to answer your question, yes, I can live with it." "That doesn't really fit with your job description," Ryan said. "I'm not an agent now," Smith replied. "Like you, I want justice." Ryan looked at him for a moment before answering. It is quite possible that Smith was simply trying to ingratiate himself so that he could then arrest everyone. But the look on Smith's face and the fire in his eyes told a different story. "Okay," Ryan said. "Welcome to the team," he added, extending his hand. Smith shook it, and they shook hands. At that moment, a dark van pulled up the driveway and stopped in front of his house. Ryan looked at his watch exactly 17 o'clock. He saw Bob, Jorge, and Bill get out of the car and walk towards the porch where Ryan introduced them. "Ryan, I want to go with you," Bob said. "I know I haven't been in as many fights as you, but I want to do my part. This is my family after all." "Do you have any military training, son?" Ryan asked. "I served in the Army Reserves for 4 years," he answered. "My unit was sent to Iraq for 8 months. "Reservists," Ryan answered. "What did you do in Iraq?" "I was a helicopter gunner for a while," Bob answered. "I don't know if this will help you." "Gunner on a helicopter?" Ryan asked. "Have you ever flown an M134 minigun?" Bob chuckled. "Yes," he answered. "Do you really have one of these?" "Today is your lucky day, son," Ryan replied. "We not only have the M134, but we also have the Huey to carry it." "Seriously?" asked Bob. "Seriously, son," Ryan replied. "Let's go inside. We need to plan." Ryan invited them into the house and closed the door behind him. After the introductions, Ryan sat everyone down and asked Beverly to pass around the beer. After everyone had been given beer, Ryan started talking. "We have a tradition. Ian, would you do the honors?" Ryan asked. Ian raised his beer. "For Dawson and all the other guys who didn't come home," Ian said. Everyone raised their beer. "For Dawson," the veteran mercenaries repeated before taking a long sip of their beer. Beverly, Bob, and Smith joined them. When they finished, Smith raised his beer. "For my friend Roger Gillespie, who gave his life protecting Sarah and her son," he said. Everyone raised their beer. "For Gillespie," they all said, taking another long sip. "We usually break bottles on the ground," Ryan said. "But since this is a fairly new carpet, we will have to do without this part of the tradition." Everyone laughed. "The plan has changed a little. Jim, meet your new shooter," he said, putting his hand on Boy's shoulder. "Have you ever fired a minigun?" asked Jim. Bob nodded. "Yes, in Iraq," he replied. "Great. When we're done here, you can join me and we'll install it for you, okay?" asked Jim. "Yes," Bob answered. Beverly walked up to Ryan and took his hand. "I want to go with you," she said. Everyone froze and looked at her in surprise. "Honey, this is not a fun trip," Ryan said. "You could get seriously hurt." "But we are partners," she said. "Where you go, I go too, remember?" "Ryan's right, Beverly," Smith said. "Besides, what would you do?" "Actually, she could help me in the command post," Bill said. "Have you seen what's inside? Jorge has so many monitors and stuff that I can't keep track of everything on my own." Ryan thought for a few moments. Bill was a good man, but his prosthetic leg would have hampered him on the field, and having someone around to watch the monitors would have freed up Jorge. He looked at Bill. "You will train her and provide her with protection, right?" he asked. "Of course, boss," Bill replied. Ryan nodded. "Okay, after we come up with a plan, you take her and start training her," Ryan said. "I will, boss," Bill replied. Ryan looked at Beverly. "Promise me you'll be careful," he said. "I promise, Ryan," she replied. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this." "I'm sorry if I confused or angered you." He took her into his arms and smiled into her face. "I'm not embarrassed or angry," he said. "I couldn't be more proud of you than I am right now. Plus, it will give us something to tell our grandchildren one day." She smiled back at him. "Is it true? Are you serious?" she asked. "Of course," he replied. "Now let's go and make a plan." Everyone headed to Ryan's office, where there was a map and diagram of the camp. They spent the next 2 hours planning the operation. Once they had finalized their plan of attack, Bill handed out GoPro-like devices that were attached to body armor and communication units with headphones on the end of a coiled wire. Each block had a number written on it. Ryan's number was 1. "Okay," Bill said. "Call sign, as always, Whiskey Delta." Ryan, of course, Whiskey Delta 1. The rest have numbers listed on their communication devices. "We will monitor your actions in the command post." "This is a command post, if anyone doesn't know," he added, looking at Beverly. "What does Whiskey Delta mean?" she asked. "War dogs," Jim answered. "It's from the old line, 'Shout devastation and let loose the dogs of war.' It's Shakespeare, you know." "So Ryan is the top attack dog?" she asked innocently. Everyone else chuckled. She looked around, not understanding what was so funny. "Sort of," Buster replied. "Okay," Ryan said. "We leave at 23 o'clock. This will put us on target at 1:30. It's still light to get ready, so let's go." Bill and Jorge handed out night glasses to everyone. Bob went with Jim to the helicopter to mount the minigun, and Bill took Beverly to the command post to begin training. At that moment, a sheriff's patrol car pulled up to the house. "Damn," Ryan said quietly as he saw Sheriff Coltrane get out of the car. Ryan looked at Agent Smith. "Help me figure this out," he said. Smith nodded and assumed the most official look. "Sheriff Coltrane," Ryan said with a smile on his face. "How can I help you, sir? I was driving by and saw all this activity and a helicopter in the yard, so I was curious," the sheriff said. "Are you planning some kind of party here or something?" Agent Smith took out his documents and showed them to the sheriff. "Special Agent Smith, FBI," he introduced himself. "Are you the same Sheriff Coltrane?" "Indeed, I am," the sheriff answered, straightening his shoulders. "I've heard good things about you, Sheriff," Smith said. "I'm always happy to help the FBI in any way I can," the sheriff replied. "Okay," Smith said with a smile. Glad to hear that. Look, Mr. Caldwell is helping us with a very important operation, and I would really appreciate it if you could help. How can I help? Asked the sheriff. We're leaving here around 11 p.m., and I'd appreciate it if you could clear a path for us from, say, here to the state line. Can you do it, Sheriff? He asked. Of course I can, Sheriff Coltrane replied. Is this something like those black operations? Sort of. The most covert operation you can imagine, Sheriff, Smith replied. There are lives at stake here, so I would appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone about this. I mean no one. In fact, it's better if you just forget we were even here. Consider it done, Agent Smith, he said. By the way, how secret is this operation? It's so secret that very few people even know it's going on, Smith replied. That's why I'm counting on you to help us keep this a secret. The truth is, I've probably already broken federal law just by telling you this is going to happen. You understand that if this comes out, it will be considered treason, and you know what the punishment for this will be. The sheriff swallowed as he considered Smith's words. You have my word, Agent Smith, he said. No one will ever hear about this from me. Thank you, Sheriff, Ryan said. We will inform you when we are ready to leave. Ryan and Smith returned to the house and entered the office. You know, I'll probably go to hell for this, Smith said. Ryan chuckled. I don't think so, Ryan replied. At least not without a good fight. Ryan put on his combat gear and pulled out a combat knife. It was the largest knife Smith had ever seen. Ryan took a piece of paper and deftly cut it into 2 pieces. Damn, Smith said. This is a knife. Is this your service pistol? Ryan asked, pointing to the gun in Smith's shoulder holster. Yes, why do you ask? Asked Smith. Leave him alone, Ryan said, walking over to the open gun cabinet in the office, along with all your ammunition. What should I use? Asked Smith. Ryan handed him a much older .45 caliber M1E 911 pistol and several fully loaded magazines already in the bandolier. This one, Ryan said. Where did you get this? Asked Smith. You don't want to know, Ryan replied. From what I heard, he came from Mexico. Smith examined the gun and noticed the serial number had been filed off. He checked the action and looked around the stores. From Mexico, you say? Ryan asked. That's what I heard, Ryan answered. I think it was one of the weapons in the Fast and Furious scandal, but I'm not 100% sure. Aha, Smith said, putting the gun in his shoulder holster. Ryan tossed Smith a can of camouflage paint. Smith caught it and put it in his jacket pocket. Apply this when we get to the state line, Ryan said. You have gloves, I hope. Gloves? Asked Smith. For what? Fingerprints, Ryan answered. I don't want to leave anything that could lead to us, just in case. Good idea, Smith replied. Yes, I have a pair of gloves. Leave them, Ryan said. Use these, he added, tossing him a pair of black gloves. I don't want gunpowder stains on your gloves, if we can avoid it. What about my jacket? Asked Smith. Leave her alone, Ryan replied. Take one of mine if you have to. We're about the same size. Smith looked into Ryan's closet and found a dark green lightweight jacket. He put it on and Ryan handed him a camouflage hat and a Kevlar vest. Smith put them on and Ryan examined him. When he finished, he nodded. Okay, Ryan said. Well, thank you, Smith replied sarcastically. Ryan smiled and looked at his watch. It's time to go, he said. He pressed the microphone on his vest. It's time to go, he said quietly. Whiskey Delta 7, give us 15 minutes, then leave. Acknowledged, Jim replied. The plan was for Smith, Jorge, Ryan, Bill, and Beverly to ride in the van while the others went by helicopter. Smith left and Ryan turned off the lights and closed the doors. Smith walked to the van where Jorge, Bill, and Beverly were waiting, while Ryan headed to the sheriff's car. Just so you know, Sheriff, we won't be using the main headlights, Ryan said. We'll only use side lights until we reach the state line. How will you see the road? The sheriff asked, perplexed. Ryan raised his night glasses. Damn it, the sheriff replied. You guys really know what you're doing, don't you? I like to think so, Ryan replied. And remember what we said earlier. Besides, you promised that if I needed anything, I could ask. I remember, the sheriff replied. Take us around the city if you can, Ryan said. I don't want people to wonder what's going on. Good idea, the sheriff replied. We can use the new detour. It's faster and will save you time. Okay, Ryan said. Follow my colleague's signal and we will follow you. I want to stop at the gas station on Highway 62 to fill up my tank. He shook the sheriff's hand and got into the van, where he saw Beverly and Bill sitting in front of a huge array of monitors and communications equipment built into what must have been a custom setup. Beverly was wearing a Kevlar vest and a helmet lay on the console in front of her. Are you ready, darling? He asked. She nodded, nervous. Don't worry. You can handle it. I already told her that, Bill said. Let's go, Ryan shouted. Jorge waved his hand and signaled to the sheriff, who responded and turned the car around. They pulled out onto the road, and once they were on the pavement, Bill turned back to the console, showing Beverly even more of the system's capabilities. Do you have a police scanner here? Ryan asked. Of course, Bill replied. Turn it on, Ryan ordered. I want to make sure our sheriff doesn't make any unnecessary calls. Got it, boss, Bill replied, turning on the scanner. They heard nothing but the usual late-night chatter, with the sheriff saying he was patrolling the bypass to the state line. Accepted, the dispatcher replied. They listened, but Sheriff Coltrane kept his word and didn't mention anything about the van behind him. They continued driving into the night and stopped at a gas station at the intersection with Highway 62. Jorge jumped out and filled the tank. If anyone needs to go to the bathroom, now is your chance, Ryan said. I need it very much, Beverly answered. Me too, Bill said. Okay, Ryan said. Hurry up. A few minutes later, they returned and headed north to New Mexico. Jorge waved to Sheriff Coltrane as he crossed the state line. He secured his night vision goggles and turned off his headlights. Ryan looked at Beverly and took her hand. She was shaking. He squeezed her hand and smiled. It's okay, honey, he said. Trifles? She nodded. It's nothing, of course, she said. Maybe for you, and I'm scared to death. This is fine. Take a deep breath, Ryan said. Now hold him back. She followed his instructions. Now exhale slowly. She obeyed, and he watched. Do this a couple more times. You're doing great. Did you really do this at work? She asked. Yes, I did, Ryan said. Bill too. How could you do this for so many years? She asked. One day at a time, Ryan said. Really, Bill? He nodded. Yeah, he said. Have you ever been afraid? She asked. All the time, Ryan said. Bill nodded. Then why did you do it? She asked. We got paid for this, Ryan told her. Fear helps you stay alert. Soon they were on the road overlooking the camp, and Jorge turned onto the road leading to the main entrance. Stop here, Ryan said quietly. Jorge pulled off the road so that the bushes hid the van. Ryan knew they were about 50 yards from the main gate. He pulled out 2 crossbows and handed one to Smith. Do you know how to handle this? He asked. Smith nodded. Fine. Went. Ryan rummaged around and pulled out the 2 remote charges that Cap had given him earlier. Then he, Smith, and Jorge quietly climbed out of the van, trying not to make a sound that might alert the guards. Ryan handed the crossbow to Smith, and they crept along the road until they were only a few yards from the gate. 2 guards were sitting at the gate, and Ryan realized that they had fallen asleep in their chairs. He motioned for Smith to remove the one sitting to the right of the road. They took careful aim and fired. Both guards fell, dead. Ryan and Smith handed the crossbows to Jorge. Get this back in the van and then quickly come back here, Ryan whispered. Jorge nodded and left with 2 crossbows. They crept up to the gate and saw no one. Ryan looked into the small guardhouse and saw a row of indicators on the control panel. No doubt, he thought, these were warning lights for the sensors in the bushes surrounding the camp. He took out a knife and cut all visible wires. Seeing large, gnarled dogwoods on either side of the narrow road, Ryan placed a charge at the base of each and activated the detonators as Cap had taught. Satisfied that they had not yet been spotted, he slowly raised the gate so that the van could enter when the time came. They looked into the area and noticed two large black SUVs parked in front of one of the buildings. Ryan motioned to Smith. "They weren't here yesterday," he whispered. Smith nodded and looked at the cars. "Mexican numbers," Smith whispered. "From Chihuahua. Any idea who they might belong to?" "No," Ryan whispered. By this time, Jorge had already returned. Ryan pointed to the building where Sarah and little Ryan were taken yesterday. "This is our goal," he whispered. Jorge and Smith nodded. Ryan activated the microphone and gave the command. "Forward, forward, forward," he said. He heard the helicopter's rotors overhead and saw the aircraft descend to about 10 feet off the ground next to the Learjet. He saw 3 ropes being released from a helicopter and 3 people climbing down them, reminding him of a passage from an old Jethro Tull song. Like spiders on ropes, falling freely. 30-round magazine instead of a business card. Pass to the embassy ball. After the people descended, they crept up to the buildings, remaining in the shadows. The helicopter took off, and all hell broke loose as the minigun opened fire, cutting off the Learjet's nose. Suddenly, guards ran out of the buildings and were directly hit by a wall of hot lead from the Kalashnikovs that Ian, Cap, and Buster were holding. The 3 men rushed towards their assigned buildings, kicking down doors and shooting as they went. Ryan heard Beverly radioing instructions. "Whiskey Delta 4, target 10 o'clock, she said, followed by a short burst of fire. While she was giving instructions, the helicopter turned fire on the cars, destroying the engines. Ryan was impressed that Bob didn't aim for the gas tanks. However, he was concerned about the possibility that the cars might catch fire after all. The last thing he wanted was an explosion that would attract local law enforcement. He looked at Jorge and Smith and signaled to move. As soon as he did this, he noticed Elmer and a security guard enter the building. They rushed towards the building, shooting at the guards who came towards them. Walking towards the door, Ryan picked up his night vision goggles. Just as he was about to knock down the door, it opened and a large man appeared on the threshold in shock. Ryan wasted no time. They rushed inside and saw Elmer wrap one arm around Sarah's upper body, holding a knife to her throat. "Watch the door," Ryan told Jorge. Jorge silently turned to the door to provide cover. They could hear the sharp sound of Kalashnikovs and the sound of a minigun. They could hear single shots, as well as screams and screams, but they soon died down. Ryan and Smith separated, pistols drawn. "One more step and I will kill your daughter," Elmer threatened, angering Ryan even more. Sarah cried, trying to free herself. "Boy, didn't anyone tell you that you shouldn't bring a knife to a gunfight?" Ryan asked. He watched and waited for the right moment while Elmer tried to change his position. Ryan knew he would only have one chance. Soon Elmer's leg came into view. Ryan took aim and fired, hitting Elmer's lower leg. He screamed and dropped the knife. Sarah, freed, ran to Ryan and Smith, while Elmer writhed in pain on the floor. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, with her arms outstretched. "Where's little Ryan?" Ryan asked his daughter. "In the next room," she said. "Take him and get the hell out of here," Ryan told Smith. "Alive!" Smith put the gun away and ran into another room where the little boy was lying on the bed. He picked the boy up and carried him into the main room, Sarah walking next to him. "Come on, Ryan, we have to leave," Smith said. "Get them out of here," Ryan said. "I'll catch up with you later." "Alive." Smith looked at Elmer, nodded, and then spoke into the microphone. "Whiskey Delta CPU, goal achieved," he said. "Take us away, quickly." "Acknowledged," Bill said. Smith escorted Sarah from the building. Jorge looked at Ryan. "Go, Jorge," Ryan said. "Cover them. I'll be there soon." Jorge nodded and left with Smith. After they left, Ryan walked over to Elmer, kicking the knife away. Elmer looked at Ryan, fear evident in his face. "Please, Ryan," he begged. Don't kill me. I have money. Lots of money. Everything is yours. Just please don't kill me. I beg. You're not so formidable now, are you? I don't want your money, motherfucker, Ryan said. I have enough of them. He kicked Elmer hard, causing him to scream in pain. This is because you slept with my wife and ruined my marriage. He kicked Elmer again twice. This is for the kidnapping of my daughter and grandson. He kicked Elmer again. And that's just because you're a vile, rotten piece of shit, and I hate you. Do you remember what I promised you, boy? Elmer nodded. Well, how do you like it? Ryan asked. Do you like this little war? Are you having fun now? Eh? Answer me, damn it. Please stop, Elmer whined. It's time to grow up, Ryan growled. You brought this on yourself. He put the gun away and pulled out a large knife, causing Elmer's eyes to widen. Do you believe in God? Ryan asked, noticing the St. Christopher medallion around Elmer's neck. Elmer nodded. Fine, because you will meet him soon, Ryan said, causing Elmer to wet himself. Ryan chuckled when he saw this. A few minutes later, Ryan was walking towards the van. He saw Smith at the open back door, motioning for him to hurry up. Ryan quickened his pace, looked back one last time to make sure everything was okay, and then went inside. As the van passed through the gate, he took the remote control out of his pocket, lifted the protective cover, and pressed the button. There were 2 muffled explosions, followed by the sound of falling trees. He looked back and saw that they had effectively blocked the gate. This should slow down anyone trying to get in or out, he thought. Delta 7 Whiskey, he said into the microphone. Report? Everything is in place, Jim replied. All buildings are under control. 1 wounded. Ryan's heart sank. Who? He asked sharply. Gunner, Jim said. Ryan knew he meant Bob. Cap says it's just a minor wound. He's fine. Ryan breathed a sigh of relief. However, it was painful to hear that his brother-in-law was injured. He's great, boss, Jim said, which made Ryan feel better. Even more than just better. He was proud of the young man. Got it, Delta 7 Whiskey, Ryan said. Go back to base. Maintain radio silence. He heard the microphone click in acknowledgement and picked up his communicator. He turned to Beverly, who was still shaking. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded. Did I manage? She asked. You did better than good, he said. You were perfect. We couldn't have done it without you. He held her until she stopped shaking. He looked at Sarah and Ryan. She held the boy in her arms and cried. He let go of Beverly and walked over to his daughter. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded and began to cry. Yes, thanks to you. Again, she said through tears. He hugged her, trying to comfort her as best he could. I'm worried about little Ryan, she said between sobs. Beverly walked up to them, looked at the boy, then leaned her ear to his mouth. He's breathing, she said. Perhaps he is just sleeping. What did they give him? I don't know, Sarah said. Cap will look at it when we get home, Ryan said. He looked at his daughter's tear-stained face. Did they do anything to you? He asked. No, but they were planning something terrible, she said. I heard them talking about having sex with me, and then they wanted to sell me to some Mexican cartel if you didn't meet their demands. Now you don't have to worry anymore, Ryan said. He sat on the bench, hugging his 2 women as Jorge drove them home. He thought about telling her about Bob, but decided to wait until they got home. He looked back at the others and realized that each of them discharged differently, so he said nothing. Bob turned on the police scanner again as they crossed the state line and heard communications indicating that local law enforcement had left Carlsbad. Arrival in 90 minutes, they heard one of the officers say. Of course, Ryan knew that didn't necessarily mean there weren't other officers nearby. He hoped they would be home when the locals arrived on the scene. Jorge, turn on your headlights and watch your speed, he said. The last thing we need is to be pulled over by the highway patrol. Got it, Jorge replied. This road wasn't a busy one, but that didn't mean there wasn't a patrolman sitting on it in ambush, waiting for the occasional car. The Border Patrol was also known to patrol some of these roads. They all seemed to be holding their breath the whole way back, but they finally arrived at his house. When Jorge stopped, Ryan exhaled. "Home sweet home," he said. Everyone got out of the van and headed inside. Ryan carried his grandson upstairs and laid him down on one of the beds. He covered the boy and kissed the top of his head. He then went downstairs and noticed Beverly had opened the back door, letting the others inside. Cap put his shoulder under Bob's uninjured arm and helped him to a chair in the kitchen. "It's just a scratch," Cap said. "The bullet ricocheted off the door and hit him. He'll need a couple of stitches, but other than that he's fine." Ryan nodded, leaned over and kissed the guy on the top of his head. He grabbed a second pack of beer and cigars from the counter and began handing them out. Sarah looked into the kitchen and saw how. Bob sits there while Cap treats his wound. She screamed and ran towards him while everyone watched. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. "You're injured. I didn't know you were there." "Who do you think was making all that noise outside, shooting at everything they saw?" asked Cap. "Was that you?" she asked. Bob nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. She hugged him and covered him with kisses. Why were you there?" "I couldn't just sit at home and wait," he said. "If something happened to you or little Ryan and I was just sitting at home, I would never forgive myself." "Oh, honey," she said, "I love you so much. Now you are my new hero." He laughed when he heard this. "Wait until we get home. I'll show you how much I appreciate what you did." He smiled at the thought of it. "Why don't you let me finish here, and then I'll check on your son," Cap said. Sarah nodded, kissed Bob again, and walked into the living room, where everyone had already opened their beers and lit cigars. "You know," Cap said quietly after she left, "the old man really thinks you're the best." Bob looked at him in surprise. "And the rest, too. You've earned their respect tonight." "How?" asked Bob. "Well, you stood up and fought for your family," Cap said. "It means a lot to tough guys like Ryan, Bill, Buster, and Ian." "And for you?" asked Bob. "You've earned the respect of all of us, Bob. Sorry, Gunner. That's what they'll call you among us from now on," Cap said. Bob smiled. "I like it," he said. "Gunner. Yes, I can live with that." "You know what else could be nice?" asked Cap, stitching up Bob's arm. "What?" asked Bob. "If you started calling Ryan Dad. He considers you the son he never had," Cap said. "Is it true?" asked Bob. Cap nodded, putting his tools away and bandaging Bob's arm. "I can see it in his face," Cap said. "The way he looks at you, the way he talks to you. He was the same with Dawson." "Who is this Dawson guy?" asked Bob. "He was with us for several years," Cap said. "He had a wife and 3 children. They were in trouble, so he joined us to pay off their debts. As a result, he threw himself on the grenade without thinking. Ryan tried to stop him, but it was too late. He has carried the blame for this ever since. I always thought it should have happened to him, not Dawson." "Damn," Bob said. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know about the old man," Cap said. "Maybe it's time to get to know him better." Bob nodded. "Maybe you're right," he said. Cap finished bandaging, collected his things, and stood up. "I better go check on your son," Cap said. "Take care of this hand for a couple of days. It may start to itch after a while. I'll give you some antiseptic cream." "Thank you," Bob said. Cap nodded and went upstairs. Ryan walked over to the table and sat down. He opened the beer and handed it to Bob, then offered him a cigar. "You know, this will probably be the only time Beverly will let you smoke one of these things here, so enjoy it while you can," he said with a smile. "Thank you, Dad," Bob said. "You don't mind if I call you that, right?" Ryan fought back a tear and shook his head. "Not at all, son," he said. "Actually, I'd be a little annoyed if you didn't." Bob chuckled. "I've seen how you get when you're annoyed," Bob said. Ryan smiled and shook his head. "No, you've seen me when I'm mad as hell," Ryan said. "But Jim told me you did great there. According to him, you stood right in the door of this helicopter after you were wounded and continued to shoot. Tell me, why did you come here?" Like I told Sarah, I just couldn't sit at home knowing that she and Ryan were in danger, Bob said. I would never forgive myself for this if something happened to them, and I would just be sitting on my butt at home waiting to hear from someone. Ryan nodded. I can respect that, Ryan said. You are a man, a father, and a husband. You wanted justice for your family, and you did it, and I couldn't be prouder to call you son. Bob looked at him in surprise. Ryan smiles, nodded, and stood up. Well, I have a little problem to solve here, Ryan said. Why don't you join us? You're going to see history made. Bob grabbed his beer and cigar and followed Ryan into the living room. Ryan picked up his beer and tapped the bottle with his knife to get everyone's attention. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at him. He put the beer down, put the knife back in its sheath, then took the cigar out of his mouth and handed it to Jim. He motioned for Beverly to come to him. She walked over and looked at him, wondering what he was going to do. As everyone watched in surprised silence, he knelt down on one knee, took her hand, and looked at her. Beverly, he began, I never thought I could love another woman again, but you came and made me feel whole again, and for this, I will always and forever love you with all my heart. Therefore, in front of all these witnesses, I ask you, will you marry me and make me the happiest person on earth? Oh my God, Ryan, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, my dear Ryan, I will marry you. I love you so much. He rose to his feet and everyone cheered and cheered. They hugged right there in front of everyone. Get a room, Buster shouted, causing everyone to laugh. There's already a room upstairs, Ryan said, causing more laughter. Oh God, the whole house is going to shake tonight, Buster said. This caused even more laughter. Ryan and Beverly hugged and kissed again. So when is the wedding? Smith shouted. Well, I need to get a few things straightened out, and then we'll get everything set up, Ryan said. If, of course, it suits the owner of the house, he added. Damn it, he's not even married yet, and he's already henpecked, Ian shouted. Everyone laughed again. Well, as they say, Ryan said, it's okay to be henpecked if you don't mind that the chicken does all the pecking. It's more than normal, Beverly said. She looked around before continuing. Just so you all know, Ryan really wears the pants in this family. I want you to know that this wonderful man once saved my life. I thought I had lost everything, but then he came and made everything right. This is what my dad does best, Sarah said, hugging Beverly. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start calling you Mom right now. After all, you risked your life for me and little Ryan, and that's something my birth mother never, ever did. Beverly hugged Sarah, and both women shed a few tears together. Of course, honey, she said. Suddenly, the phone rang. Wait, Smith shouted. This is for me. Everyone, be quiet. Everyone went quiet as Smith answered the phone. Yes, it's Smith, he said. They only heard his side of the conversation. Yeah. What's happened? In New Mexico? Is it true? Sounds terrible. Okay, call Jones and tell him to meet me there. I'll be there as soon as possible. Fine. See you. He ended the call and looked at the group. What was that? Ryan asked. Local law enforcement in New Mexico contacted the FBI El Paso field office, Smith said. They want me to investigate an attack on a corporate retreat. They said the place looked like a war zone. There are no survivors. You don't know anything about it, do you? We? Asked Jim. Oh, hell no, he added, drawing laughter. That's what I thought, Smith said. Anyway, I need to clean myself up and go. Would you mind making me some coffee? My pleasure, Beverly said. While she was making coffee, Ryan spoke. There are 2 more bedrooms upstairs, guys, and this couch isn't too bad. You can stay overnight, he said. Everyone went to their places to sleep. Ryan met Smith at the front door as he prepared to leave. Did you take everything? He asked. Yes, Smith said. It's a good thing you made me leave my service pistol and badge here. Are you sure everything will be okay? Ryan asked. You put your career on the line tonight. Let me worry about my career, Smith said. Everything will be fine. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Will you be home? I'll be flying east with Sarah, Bob, and Ryan, but you can still reach me by phone, Ryan said. Smith nodded. Okay, he said, I'll be in touch. Thanks again, Ryan said, for everything. You're welcome, Smith said, shaking Ryan's hand. Tired, Ryan closed the door and headed upstairs, where his future wife was waiting for him. He knew they could only get a few hours of sleep before she had to get up and tend to her chickens. I need a break, he told himself as he lay down next to Beverly. Good night, my future husband, Beverly said, kissing his face. He kissed her back and hugged her. She was so soft and warm. Good night, my future wife, he replied before falling asleep. The next morning, Ryan woke up to the smell of bacon coming from the kitchen. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the clock 7 a.m. Damn, he thought. Beverly loves to get up early to feed her chickens. He glanced at her side of the bed and noticed that she had already left. He didn't even notice how she stood up. He climbed out of bed, took a quick shower, and got dressed in his regular clothes. Then he saw a note on the dresser. My dear Ryan, the note began. I got up early to tend to the chickens. I have a few deliveries to make this morning, so I won't be there until noon. I knew you were exhausted from yesterday, so I let you sleep. Sarah said she would make breakfast for everyone. I know you were planning on taking the kids home today. If you need to leave before I get back, just call. I'll be fine. I love you very much. The note was signed, Your soon-to-be-happy wife, Beverly. He smiled and shook his head. She's so devoted to her chickens, he thought. How she could do what she did last night and still get up so early to tend to them, he wondered. He heard the sound of the TV on as he went downstairs. Buster noticed him and motioned for him to come into the living room. Little Ryan was sitting on the couch with Buster and Ian, so he picked the boy up and sat him on his lap as he sat down. The boy's eyes were glued to the TV, like everyone else in the room. Look at that, buddy, Buster said, turning up the volume a little. Knight Petroleum shares fell this morning after news of a possible attack on the company's southeast New Mexico retreat, the news anchor said. State law enforcement agencies are working with FBI agents to determine what really happened. We are transported to the location of the press conference, which is taking place in the camp. The scene changed to a report from the scene of events in the camp. Agent Smith's face, tired and exhausted, filled the screen. We continue to gather evidence to find out what happened here last night, he said. How many people were killed or injured in the attack? One of the reporters shouted. We will not be releasing this information until next of kin have been notified, Smith said. Were there any survivors or witnesses? Another reporter asked. Smith shook his head. No, he said. No one has gotten in touch yet. No survivors were found in the camp. Is it possible that illegal substances are involved? Asked the third reporter. We are looking at all possible possibilities, Smith said. What about terrorism? Another reporter shouted. As I said, we are looking at all options, Smith responded. Could this be related to the ongoing investigation into former CEO Jacob Knight or the assassination attempt on interim CEO Lisa Knight? Another reporter asked. We are not ruling out any of these possibilities, Smith said. If that's the case, how will that affect one of the investigations? Asked the first reporter. You need to take this question to the federal prosecutor prosecuting these cases, Smith said. I am here to investigate a possible crime, not to speculate on the impact of an ongoing case that is being tried. Damn, that Smith is a real cold-blooded guy, Buster said. Everyone agreed. Can you tell us anything about how this was reported? One reporter asked. This is a fairly remote area, and as far as we know, the nearest neighbor is a few miles away. Smith turned to a local sheriff's deputy who approached the podium. Actually, the closest neighbor is about 12 miles away, the sheriff's deputy said. He was outside when he thought he heard gunshots coming from the area. He called 911, and it took officers up to an hour and a half to determine that this was the scene of an accident. Why is it taking so long? One of the reporters asked. Well, look around you, the deputy sheriff said. There are few roads here, not many people. There's a lot of ground to cover. This is not a big city for you. Agent Smith, have you contacted anyone from Night Petroleum Management? Asked the reporter. No, I didn't, he said. We tried to get in touch, but were told they were unavailable. Don't you think this is a little strange? Asked the second reporter. We find a lot of things strange about this incident, he said in response. That's all for today. We will let you know when we have new information. Thank you. He walked away from the podium, and the scene changed to a reporter on the scene speaking into a microphone. We just heard from FBI Special Agent John Smith, who said they are looking at several possible scenarios and can't provide definitive information yet, the young woman said. It is interesting to note that damaged subs with Mexican license plates were previously seen being driven away from the site, as well as the damaged fuselage of a Learjet aircraft registered to Night Petroleum. We have been able to confirm that this is one of a small fleet of aircraft used to transport executives and VIP clients. I give you the floor, George. Thank you, Sherry, the news anchor said as the stage moved back to the studio. We now flash forward to Central City, where reporters are awaiting a press conference from a representative of Night Petroleum. The scene changed back to the briefing room. The podium stood in front of a curtain that featured the Night Petroleum logo. As they watched, an attractive brunette walked up to the podium and consulted her notes. Sarah, noticing that everyone was glued to the news on the screen, began bringing plates of eggs and bacon into the living room. She placed the tray on the coffee table and placed a small plate of food on it for little Ryan. Sorry, honey, Bob said. Do you need help? No, I can handle it myself, she said. You guys keep watching the news. The men began to eat as soon as food appeared in front of them. Ryan sat little Ryan down in front of the coffee table so he could eat his breakfast. As they watched, the brunette looked at the reporters in the room and spoke. As you are all aware, reports surfaced this morning that a retreat owned and operated by Night Petroleum was allegedly attacked by an unknown person or persons. She began, reading from the sheet. Victims have been reported, but we will not be releasing names until next of kin are notified. Of course, our condolences go out to the families of the victims, and we will do everything we can to minimize the impact on the families of the victims. We are working with federal and state authorities in New Mexico to determine the facts of the case. Now we will answer a few questions from the press. All the reporters raised their hands, and the brunette chose one from the front row. The damaged Learjet, registered to Night Petroleum, was reportedly removed from the scene for analysis. The reporter began. To the best of our knowledge from your own reports, this aircraft is one of several used by your company to transport executives, board members, and VIP clients. Were any of your executives or board members on board the plane or on the campgrounds at the time of the attack? And if so, what's wrong with them now? I don't have that information, the brunette said. At this point, I don't know who was on board the plane. Perhaps it was empty and just stopped to refuel. Our flight crews sometimes do this and often use these areas for overnight stays. There is also a small staff on site for maintenance and security. You don't know where your own executives or board members are? The reporter insisted. I didn't say that, the brunette replied. I simply said that I did not know whether the leaders were on board the plane or on the premises. It is quite possible that there were no passengers. But the flight plan we found shows the plane took off from here the day before yesterday, and its destination was New Mexico, another reporter said. Also, according to the manifest we received, the plane had 9 passengers on board, the maximum number it can safely carry. Can you explain this? I can't explain it, the brunette said. I will need to go to management to confirm this statement. Why haven't we heard from your chairman of the board, Mr. Elmer Jenkins, or anyone else on the board? Another reporter shouted. I can't answer that question, the brunette said, drawing groans from reporters. Another reporter stood up. Reports have emerged from the UK in recent days that the body of one of your board members, Mr. Colin Blackstone, was found dismembered and stuffed in a suitcase in Manchester, England, the reporter said. How do you react to this? We just got these messages, the brunette said. Mr. Blackstone recently returned to England for family reasons. We have nothing more to add except that we are cooperating with authorities to look into this matter. This will conclude today's press conference, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much." She turned and walked away from the podium, clearly agitated. Reporters shouted questions at her, but she ignored them. Ryan turned to Jorge and Bill. "Blackstone," Ryan said. "This is the guy Timmy pointed out as the one who introduced him to Jake, remember?" Jorge nodded. "What?" asked Sarah. "Yes," Ryan said. "Timmy was the one who shot Lisa. According to him, this Blackstone approached him with an offer, took him to meet Jake, and then provided him with weapons, instructions, and payment. I asked Elmer about this, and he told me that Blackstone needed to come home urgently due to a family situation." "Damn it," Ian said. "I agree," Ryan said, "but we have another problem." "Which?" asked Buster. "If Sheriff Coltrane saw this report, he would start looking for answers," Ryan said. "Is this the sheriff who came last night and escorted us to the state line?" asked Jorge. Ryan nodded. "That's it," Ryan said. "Agent Smith and I spoke with him personally. Russell T. Coltrane may seem like a simple country sheriff, but he is very smart. He'll put 2 and 2 together, and I suspect he'll be here soon." "Then we should probably disappear," said Buster. "Agreed, mate," Ian said. "If Gunner helps me, I can have the helicopter ready to fly in 15 minutes, Jim said. "Bill and I better leave too," Jorge said. He remembered me well, and so did the van. Ryan thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay," he finally said. "Let's go." Everyone got up and started collecting their things. Bob went out with Jim to help prepare the helicopter for takeoff. Ryan walked Jorge and Bill to the van. "Will you do me a favor?" Ryan asked Jorge. "Sure, whatever," Jorge replied. "Can you let me know when Jake's next court date is?" Ryan asked. "I think it's scheduled for tomorrow," Jorge said. "I'll have Bill double-check the schedule on our way back and let you know." "Can you do it right from the van?" Ryan was surprised. Jorge smiled. "Of course," he said. "That's why they call it mobile. We can access the internet from anywhere these days. Welcome to the 21st century." Okay, Ryan said. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Jorge said. "We'll be in touch." They said their goodbyes and Ryan watched them drive away. He returned to the house and met Ian, Cap, and Buster. They packed their things and were ready to leave. Ryan shook their hands. "Thanks, guys," Ryan said. "I really appreciate your help." "You're welcome, mate," Ian said. "Just don't forget to invite us to the wedding." "Of course," Ryan said. They walked out to the helicopter and Ryan watched it take off, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. When the dust settled, he saw Bob walking towards the house. "Do you think Elmer might have orchestrated Blackstone's murder?" Sarah asked, putting away the dishes. Ryan nodded. "Yes, I think so," he said. "He was an extra piece that needed to be removed." "What a nightmare," she said. "And to think that Lisa was part of all of this. What a disappointment. She fooled us all." Ryan noted that this was the first time she called her mother by her first name instead of Mom. "It's true," Ryan said. He glanced at little Ryan, who was sitting on the couch watching TV. "I'm glad to see little Ryan is okay." "Me too," Sarah said. "He scared me so much last night." Cap examined him and said that he would be fine. "But I still want to claw that bitch's eyes out for what they did to him." Ryan didn't argue, so he just hugged and kissed her forehead. "I understand how you feel," he said. "Listen, I need to make some calls. I'll be outside." "Okay, Dad," she replied. FBI Special Agent John Smith looked around what was left of the camp. He looked completely different in daylight. He recalled the events of the previous night as he surveyed the destruction. He shuddered when he saw the burned Elmer in the still smoking fireplace of the building where he, Jorge, and Ryan had encountered Jenkins. Smith was glad Ryan insisted he leave the building when it happened. He knew about the old mercenary's reputation, but he had never imagined how cruel Ryan could be. He felt sorry for the poor fellows who found themselves under this heavy fire. Among the evidence found were 2 crossbow arrows. Smith recalled shooting one of these arrows, killing one of the guards. "Any fingerprints on these?" he asked Jones, pointing to the arrows, which were now in separate evidence bags. "No, none," Jones replied. "Whoever used them knew what they were doing." Smith chuckled in response. "Is there a video?" "They must have installed surveillance cameras," Smith asked. "They had a system, but all the cables went through the gatehouse and they were cut," Jones said. "So no, there is no CCTV footage," Smith nodded. Ryan turned out to be more cunning and thorough than he thought. "What about tire marks or shoe marks?" asked Smith. "Forget it," Jones replied. "When I arrived here, the road was clogged with all kinds of cars. They had to bring in a huge truck to remove the trees blocking the gate, and there were at least 100 agents and officers tramping around the entire area. Whatever traces there were have long since disappeared." Smith nodded, considering Jones's words. He mentally went through what was found in the camp. The naked and semi-nude bodies of several people were found in the buildings, some of whom had apparently been shot during sex. Smith and Agent Jones discovered a huge cache of drugs and weapons. They also found a huge number of DVDs and documents, all of which were neatly packaged for further examination in El Paso. Several computers were also packed and sent for examination. Agent Jones approached him and handed him a document. Smith looked at it and saw that it was a list of known dead. With the exception of Colin Blackstone, the list included all members of Knight Petroleum's board of directors, as well as the company's chief financial officer. The list also included 8 unidentified women. "I've already sent that list to El Paso," Jones said. "They will take care of notifying relatives. They will also contact the Mexican consulate." Smith nodded. "Okay," he said. "What do you think, boss? A drug deal gone wrong?" Jones asked. Smith looked around before answering. "Perhaps," said Smith, knowing full well how everything really happened. "What do you think?" Jones thought for a moment before answering. "Judging by the severity of the attack and the presence of these Mexicans, I would say it was something drug-related," Jones said. "Perhaps it was a hit by a rival cartel, and Knight's people were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time." Smith said. "Sounds logical." His calm voice hid the storm raging within. He served his country throughout his adult life, first in the Navy as a member of a SEAL team, then in the FBI as a special agent. And now he was directly involved in covering up his own illegal actions. He pondered the situation as he looked around the area. He knew how easily things could fall apart. Just a partial fingerprint, a reflection in a phone photo, or a tiny trace of DNA from someone else's saliva could ruin everything. Was Ryan really that good, he wondered? Was he able to pull it all off without leaving a trace? "Anything else?" he asked Jones. He shook his head. "No, boss," he replied. "Everyone is on their way to El Paso." Smith nodded. As he pondered what was happening, something in his mind troubled him. Ryan said he hasn't seen any vehicles here before. He knew that the plane could carry a maximum of 9 people, 2 SUVs 10 or 12. Where are the rest? From what he and Jones saw, at least 15 people lived here permanently. Had Knight really left them without transport, and could anyone really hear the shots 12 miles away? Something didn't add up, and he was determined to get to the bottom of the truth. "Okay, let's get out of here," he said. "I'm tired and I need to sleep." "Of course, boss," Jones replied. Ryan ended the calls and returned to the house. Sarah was playing with little Ryan by the pool, so he went to his office. He knew he would have to get rid of any evidence left over from the nighttime raid, so he disassembled the weapons he and Smith had used, cleaned them thoroughly, and put them in a box. But how to get rid of it? He took a box of gun parts and dug a hole near the shooting range, filling the box with dirt. He knew that sooner or later he would have to dispose of the parts elsewhere, but at least this way he got them out of the house. He returned to the house and had just cleaned up when he heard a car pull into his driveway. He looked out and saw that it was Sheriff Coltrane. He looked around to make sure there was nothing incriminating in sight, then opened the door and went outside. "Good morning, Sheriff," Ryan said as he walked out onto the porch. "How can I help you this morning?" Sheriff Coltrane walked up to the porch and extended his hand, which Ryan shook. "Should I bring you something? Coffee? Tea?" "No, thank you for the offer, Mr. Caldwell," he said. "Do you mind if we talk for a few minutes?" "Not at all, Sheriff," Ryan replied. "Have a seat. Do you mind if I smoke?" "Your house," the sheriff replied. "Do you mind if I join you?" "You're welcome," Ryan said, lighting a cigarette. "How's Beverly been lately?" Sheriff Coltrane asked. "Very good, thanks for asking," Ryan replied. "She's been delivering eggs since the morning." "Yes, I saw her at the Jennings house," the sheriff said. "Are you two getting along?" "Yeah, I basically asked her to marry me," Ryan said. "And she agreed." "I'm happy for you," Sheriff Coltrane said. "Congratulations. I knew you two would get along." He took a long drag from his cigarette before continuing. "I see you arrived home safely yesterday. Did everything go smoothly?" "Yeah, everything went fine, thanks," Ryan said. He knew that the sheriff was playing with him, and he waited for the second blow. "Did you see the news this morning?" asked the sheriff. "This is it," Ryan thought. "You mean the incident in New Mexico last night?" Ryan asked. "Yes, I saw it." "I wonder if that FBI agent they talked to is the same person I talked to last night," Sheriff Coltrane said. "I looked at my map and noticed that the camp is not far from where I left you on the state border last night. Don't you know anything about this?" Ryan shrugged. He looked at the sheriff and tried to read his expression, but couldn't. He thought for a moment and made a decision. "I hope it is correct." "They had my daughter and my grandson," Ryan said quietly. "They were going to use her and then sell her, and who knows what they would have done with the boy if the feds hadn't given up on pursuing night petroleum." He looked at the sheriff, but still couldn't read his expression. "Tell me, Sheriff, what would you do if it were your daughter, your grandson?" "Well, Ryan," the sheriff said. "Can I call you Ryan?" Ryan nodded. "I think if it were me, I would move mountains to get them back." The sheriff looked at him carefully before continuing. "You know, Ryan, I may be the county sheriff, but I'm not stupid," he added, his West Texas accent all but gone. Ryan looked at him, confused. "I assumed it was something like that. I understand the need for secrecy, but I would like you to tell me directly." Ryan nodded. "So what are you going to do now?" Ryan asked. Sheriff Coltrane shook his head. "There's nothing I can do or say, even if I wanted to, but I don't want to," he said. "That guy from the FBI made me swear an oath of silence, remember? Plus, there is no law against driving in a van late at night, at least not in this county. In my opinion, if you took out that gang, you did us all a big favor." Ryan chuckled, noticing that the accent had returned. "Who is this guy really?" he asked himself. "Speaking of the law," Sheriff Coltrane added, "have you ever thought about going into law enforcement?" Ryan laughed. "Seriously?" he asked. "I am an old man, and I have only one eye." Sheriff Coltrane laughed. "Old?" he asked. "Son, I'm much older than you. Besides, I have to deal with this," he said, lifting one pant leg to show off his prosthetic leg. "So why are you asking me?" Ryan asked. "I've never worked in the police, and I'm too old to start from the bottom." "Fortunately, that is not a requirement to become sheriff in this county," the sheriff said. "The sheriffs here are appointed by the county council based on recommendations from local residents." "That's all well and good, but what are you getting at?" Ryan asked. "I plan to retire in a couple of months," the sheriff said. "I was thinking about who would be best suited to take my place." "Surely you have deputies who are much more qualified than I am," Ryan said. "Yeah, that's a good group of guys," Sheriff Coltrane said. "Hell, one of them even served in the LAPD before he came here. But none of them wants to take on this job. I already asked." "So why me?" Ryan asked. "The people here love you," the sheriff said. "Everyone says that you are a good person, and I agree with them. Plus, you command respect. Trust me, it's a lot safer than what you were doing before you moved here. Ryan looked at him in surprise. Oh yes, said the sheriff. I know everything about you. You're not the only one who has friends, you know. Does Beverly know? Yes, he does, Ryan replied. And she's okay with that? Ryan nodded. Well, said the sheriff. If I agree, will you at least help me get comfortable? Ryan asked. Of course, said Sheriff Coltrane. I will not throw you into the wolf pack. I need to take care of a few things and talk to Beverly about that first, Ryan said. I expected nothing less, the sheriff replied. When do you need to know? Ryan asked. Any time in the next few days will do. Just don't take too long, the sheriff said. You let me know and I will submit my recommendation to the council. By the way, when are you and Beverly planning your wedding? We haven't set a date yet, Ryan said. Well, I would appreciate an invitation, the sheriff said. Believe it or not, I have a lot of respect for her. She's been through a lot. Consider that you have already received the invitation, Ryan said. By the way, why don't you come and meet my daughter and grandson? I'd be glad, the sheriff said. And please, call me Russell. Okay, Russell, Ryan said. They entered the house and saw Bob, Sarah, and little Ryan in the kitchen. Sarah looked up as they entered. Bob, Sarah, this is Sheriff Russell Coltrane, Ryan said. Russell, this is my daughter Sarah, her husband Bob, and my grandson Ryan. Russell smiled, hugged Sarah, then shook Bob's hand. He knelt down to greet little Ryan, but the boy clung to Sarah's leg. It's okay, little guy, Russell said. I'm your grandfather's friend. The kid looked at Sarah, then at Ryan, who smiled and nodded. Gradually, the boy let go of Sarah's leg and extended his hand. Russell smiled, took the boy's hand in his, and shook it gently. Russell stood up and looked at Sarah. You're a wonderful boy, he said. Sarah smiled nervously and thanked him. It's okay, honey, Ryan said. He's aware. Russell nodded. Are you all right? He asked her. Yes, we're fine, thank you, she replied. Glad to hear that, Russell said. Are you going to? She began, but Russell shook his head. Arrest your father? He asked, finishing her question. She nodded. He shook his head and replied, No, I'm not going to. Heck, I'd do the same thing if it were my daughter. Moreover, I want your father to become sheriff when I retire. Is it true? She asked, shocked. I can't think of anyone better to protect the people in these parts, Russell said. Wow, she said, smiling. My father is the sheriff. Ryan shrugged. Are you going to do it, Dad? Asked Bob. Well, I need to talk to Beverly first and clear up a few things, but I think so, Ryan said. Well, congratulations, Sheriff, Bob said, extending his hand. Ryan smiled and shook Bob's hand. Okay, guys, Russell said. It's time for me to go. It was a pleasure to meet you all. Nice to meet you, Sheriff, Bob said. Ryan walked Russell to the door just as Beverly arrived. They met in the driveway. Hi, Beverly, Russell said. Hello, Sheriff, she replied. Everything is fine. It's okay, honey, Ryan said. He's aware. She looked at Russell, wondering if he was going to take her husband away. It's okay, honey, Russell said. So you're not going to arrest Ryan? She asked. Arrest him? Russell asked. Hell no, I'm going to make him sheriff. She looked at him in surprise. Seriously? She asked. Well, of course the county board has the final say, but if I have the opportunity, yes, Russell said. I haven't given my consent yet, Ryan said. I told him I needed to talk to you first. Thank you for this, she said. Honestly, I think it's a great idea. This will at least get you out of the house, she added with a smile. Russell laughed before continuing. By the way, congratulations to both of you, he said. Your father would be so proud. Thank you, she said. Suddenly, her face changed. Oh God, that reminds me. What? Ryan asked. Who will walk me to the altar? She asked. Ryan looked at her for a moment, then they both turned to Russell. Beverly spoke first. Sheriff, I hate to ask, but could you? What? Walk you down the aisle? I'd be proud, Beverly, Russell said, as long as Ryan doesn't mind. No way, Ryan said. Honestly, I can't think of anyone better. Well then, Russell said, it's decided. Beverly hugged him and kissed his cheek. Thank you very much, she said. Please, he replied, but only if you start calling me Russell. I will, Sheriff, Russell, she said. Well, I gotta go, Russell said, opening his car door. Have a nice day, all of you, do you hear? Absolutely, Russell, Ryan said, and I'll call you when I get back. I want to discuss this with you before making a final decision. Sounds good, Ryan, Russell said. See you. They waved as Russell drove off. Ryan helped her carry her things into the house and poured her a glass of tea. So, what happened? She asked when he served her tea. Did you hear the news this morning? Ryan asked. Heard something about it on the radio, she replied. Well, as I suspected, Russell saw the report and put all the pieces of the puzzle together, Ryan said. He came to talk to me about it. I thought for a moment that he was going to arrest me, but he didn't. He said that Smith took an oath of silence from him. He also said that he knew about my past. He had every right to handcuff me and take me away, but he didn't. Instead, he wants me to take his place when he retires. I think someone is looking down on you, Beverly said. Looks like it, he replied. So, how was your day? Very good, she replied. I found a couple more clients today. Great, Ryan said. By the way, I have a flight booked to send the kids this afternoon. I didn't want to leave until you came back. I appreciate it, she replied. Sorry for not waking you up this morning, but I thought you were exhausted. I definitely was. Thank you, I appreciate it, but you should have woken me up anyway, he said. I'd love to help you. I know, but I wanted you to rest, she said. Speaking of sleep, I'm just falling off my feet. I hope you don't mind if I go home and fall into bed. I don't mind one bit, he said. You deserve a good night's sleep. Thank you, she said, standing up. He hugged her and kissed her tenderly. I love you so much, he said. She smiled and kissed him back. I love you even more, she said. Call me tonight, okay? I want to make sure you get there safely. Absolutely, he said. Go home. I'll call you in the evening. Maybe when I get back, you can show me those little shorts again. Maybe I'll make a new pair just for you, she said, with a sly twinkle in her eye. They stood for a while, looking into each other's eyes. Hey guys, Sarah called from the kitchen. There are small spectators here. Ryan and Beverly smiled and turned to Sarah, who was holding little Ryan. The boy looked at Beverly, a little scared. Beverly walked up to the boy and stroked his head. Sorry, we probably haven't met yet, Beverly said. Are you Grandpa's friend? Asked little Ryan. Yes, she's his friend, Sarah replied. In fact, she will be your new grandmother. The boy looked at Beverly for a moment, confused. Are you really going to be my new grandmother? He asked. Beverly smiled and nodded. Yes, I will, she said. Is this okay with you? The boy thought for a moment before answering. Will you help Grandpa find his eye? He asked. If he wants, I'll help, Beverly replied. Ryan looked lost in thought. Then he looked at her. Okay, he said. You can be my new grandmother. Beverly smiled and took the boy in her arms. Thank you, she said. This is very important to me. Please, he replied. Beverly stood up and looked at Sarah. He's a wonderful boy, she said. Reminds me of my own son. Well, if you don't mind, I'll go home and get a good night's sleep. Of course, Mom, you deserve it, Sarah said, hugging her. Beverly's eyes watered when she heard Sarah call her Mom. They parted and Beverly headed for the door. Don't forget to call, she said, opening the door. I won't forget, honey, Ryan replied. He walked up to her and kissed her again. Get some sleep, okay? Don't worry, I'll fall asleep as soon as my head hits the pillow, she replied. He watched as she got into the car. He waved at her as she drove away and saw her wave back. She'll be good for you, Dad, Sarah said from the kitchen. I'm just sure of it. I know, Ryan said. Well, are you ready to leave? The plane takes off at 14 o'clock. Almost ready, Bob replied. I'm almost done. Well, hurry up, we have to get going, Ryan said. On my way, Bob shouted back. Ryan shook his head. Children, he said with playful sarcasm. They get shot and think they can get away with it now. Sarah laughed. It's good to see you're joking, Dad, she said. He smiled, hugging her. Bob came back downstairs carrying a suitcase. Okay, I'm ready, Bob said. Let's go. Sarah giggled as Ryan gave her a sarcastic look. He checked the doors, grabbed his duffel bag, and followed Sarah and Bob out the door. His phone rang as he parked the truck, letting him know there was a message. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from Agent Smith. Long day, the message said. Watch the evening news. Interesting events. Call me after. Need some sleep. Too old for this shit. Ryan chuckled and put the phone away. He was curious to know what Smith had to say. They entered the terminal, checked in, and headed to the security check area. His phone rang again, and he saw that it was a call from Bill. Yes, he said when he answered the phone. Confirm that Jake has a court appearance tomorrow at 8 o'clock, Bill said. I also checked and found out that maintenance of the video surveillance system will be carried out all day tomorrow. I think they are preparing for possible protests and riots. Interesting, Ryan said. This is useful information. I think so too, Bill replied. How did it go with the sheriff? He got it, Ryan said. What? And are you still free? Bill was surprised. Yes, Ryan replied. Moreover, he wants me to become sheriff when he retires. Damn it, Bill said. That's luck. You would know, Ryan said. Okay, we're about to board the flight. I'll call you later. By the way, Smith wrote to tell me that I should watch the evening news. Maybe you'll catch them on the road. Yes, of course, I'll definitely look, Bill replied. Today, this is all they talk about. Knight Petroleum has lost a lot in the market. These bastards deserve it, Ryan said. We'll talk later. Okay, boss, see you later, Bill replied, ending the call. Finally, they settled into their seats on the plane and were fast asleep when the plane reached altitude. After landing, they got off the plane, picked up their luggage, and headed to the car rental, where Ryan rented a nondescript sedan. When they arrived at Bob and Sarah's house, Ryan and Bob put everything in its place. Luckily, most of the mess left behind by the kidnapping had already been cleaned up, but the house still smelled of antiseptic and bleach. Sarah opened the windows to ventilate the house. Bob pulled out a couple of beers and handed one to Ryan. They sat in the living room and turned on the news. They listened as the announcer read out some local news, but their attention was soon drawn to what was called a breaking news story. Just in on Eyewitness News, the announcer said. Federal authorities have released the names of those killed in a raid on a New Mexico retreat owned by Knight Petroleum. The victims included 6 of the company's 7 board members, including Elmer Jenkins, the board's chairman, officials said. This follows reports from the UK that another councillor, Colin Blackstone, has been found dead in Manchester, the announcer continued. In addition, the chief financial officer of Knight Petroleum was found dead in New Mexico. We now switch to reporting from Brenda Carpenter in El Paso. Brenda. The shot changed to an attractive blonde standing in front of a tall building, presumably in El Paso, Texas. Yes, Jerry, thank you, she said. We spoke with federal authorities, and they told us that, in addition to Knight management, at least 4 Mexican citizens were among those killed in New Mexico. In addition, a large cache was found at the site. Suddenly, Smith's face appeared on the screen, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. We're still sorting through all the evidence we've collected, Smith said. Can you confirm reports that the facility hosted illegal parties and human trafficking? Asked one of the reporters. Based on the data we have, it is, Smith responded. There have also been reports that 2 of your agents have been killed in Central City, another reporter added. We believe they were defending the daughter of Lisa Knight, Knight's interim CEO, who was shot and killed in the company parking lot. Can you confirm this information, and are these events related? I was given permission to confirm this information, Smith said. At this point, I believe it is safe to conclude that all of the incidents involving Knight are connected in some way. The frame changed again, returning to the blonde reporter. Agent Smith told us that the agency is reviewing a huge amount of evidence that points to the involvement of company executives in a variety of crimes. It seems this is just the tip of the iceberg. Jerry, over to you, she said. Thank you, Brenda, Jerry replied. And now we cut to Andrew Conrad, who is outside the federal court where disgraced former CEO Jacob Knight is scheduled to appear again tomorrow morning. Andrew? Yes, Jerry, that's right, Mr. Knight, who is now confined to a wheelchair after the robbery, should be here tomorrow morning, Andrew said. I spoke with Marvin Morrison, the federal prosecutor in charge of the case. The video changed, and they saw a tall, thin man with curly hair talking to a reporter. The evidence we have seen thus far indicates that Knight Petroleum executives spent more time committing crimes and covering them up than they did producing oil and gas, Marvin said. And something tells me this is just the beginning. Will there be additional charges brought? Asked Andrew. Absolutely, Marvin replied, and I expect there will be even more. Will you talk to the surviving executives? Asked Andrew. Yes, said Marvin. We have already begun these discussions and have expanded the investigation to include lower-level managers. The defense has been able to block many of your motions so far, Andrew said. What's your strategy this time? Well, Andrew, Marvin said, you are right. The defense managed to set up many obstacles, but I think everything will change tomorrow. What charges can we expect? Asked Andrew. Shocking accusations, Marvin replied. That's all I can say for now. Tomorrow morning you will know more. So, Jerry, Andrew said after Marvin left, looks like we're in for some big things tomorrow morning. Thanks, Andrew, Jerry said. We'll keep an eye on this. He turned to the other camera. The allegations against Knight Petroleum also had a major impact on the market today as the company's shares fell, causing concern among investors. We now turn our attention to our Eyewitness News financial analyst, Tyler Morgan. Tyler, what are your predictions? Well, Jerry, Tyler said as he appeared on camera, I think Knight Petroleum may be on its last legs. If something is not done soon, the company could go bankrupt, and this could have global consequences. Are there any rumors about possible steps to save the company? Jerry asked. I've heard rumors, but I can't confirm anything yet, Tyler responded. I know that if something happens, you'll be the first to report it, Tyler, Jerry said. Thank you. He turned back to the camera. Now, the next story is the joyride of man's best friend. Stay tuned to Eyewitness News. Bob turned off the TV when the channel went to a commercial break. You're an analyst, Bob, Ryan said. What do you think? I think Knight Petroleum is in serious trouble, Bob said. I'll be surprised if they're still in business in a month. Ryan nodded in agreement. Looks like you're right, he said. He took out his phone and called Smith, who answered on the first ring. Yes, Smith is listening, he said. I just saw the news, Ryan said. Is all this true? You wouldn't believe what we found in this camp, said Smith. It seems to me that if we had not acted, someone else would have definitely done it. What exactly did you find? Ryan asked. Incredible stuff, Ryan, Smith said. More banned items than you can imagine, sex DVDs, evidence of human trafficking, and that's just the beginning. I also think I understand why the agency turned a blind eye to Gillespie's murder. Damn, Ryan said. Did they really have a mole inside the agency? Yes, Smith replied. Someone quite high in the hierarchy. He has already been interrogated. Is there evidence linking Lisa to all of this? Ryan asked. Not yet, Smith replied. They may have been able to hide it from her, but I don't understand how she could not have noticed that something was going on. Perhaps she was blinded by Jake's money and was too caught up in her work. Don't know. How are you doing? Well, Sheriff Coltrane figured it out after the report this morning, Ryan said. He came to me after the guys left. Oh, really? Asked Smith. And he didn't arrest you? No, Ryan replied. Moreover, he wants me to take his place as sheriff when he retires. Smith laughed. Damn, boy, you're lucky, he said. Are you going to do this? I'm thinking about it, Ryan replied. I have a few things to take care of first. Well, maybe when this is all over, I'll knock on your door asking for a job, Smith said. Are you going to retire or something? Ryan asked. I'm thinking about it, Smith said. The agency is not what it used to be. Maybe they need a good man like you to be the director and fix everything, Ryan said. Maybe, don't know. Everything has become too politicized lately. How are Beverly and the kids? Asked Smith. They're doing well, Ryan replied. By the way, will you come to the wedding? I wouldn't miss it for the world, Smith said. In any case, I'll be in touch. Take care of yourself, do you hear? Absolutely, Ryan said. Bye. They ended the call and Ryan left to call Beverly. After a while, he returned with a smile on his face. Sarah noticed this and sat next to him on the couch while he played with little Ryan. Have you talked to Mom yet? Asked Sarah. Ryan knew she meant Beverly. He nodded. Yes, he replied, tickling young Ryan on his lap. How did you know? Well, you left to make a call and then came back with such a satisfied smile on your face, she said. It's good to see that you've fallen in love again. I remember you were like that with Lisa. Ryan looked at her and saw tears form in her eyes. He stopped tickling his grandson to hug his daughter. She burst into tears. Forgive me, Dad, she cried. I treated you so badly when I was a child, and you still saved my life twice. I don't deserve a father like you. It's okay, Princess, he whispered in her ear. You were young, stupid, and influenced. They took advantage of this. But you realized your mistake and changed. You have achieved a lot in life. I'm proud of what you did. You have a wonderful family, and I will always be by your side. Thank you, Dad, she said, sobbing. I love you. I love you too, he replied. It's time for me to cook dinner, she said. After she left for the kitchen, Ryan returned to his grandson, who squealed happily as his grandfather tickled him again. That night, when he fell asleep, Ryan dreamed of beautiful blonde women in short shorts and white t-shirts. The next morning, the courtroom quickly filled as reporters, potential witnesses, and observers began to take their seats. No one paid attention to the tall man sitting in the last row. Wearing a dark baseball cap, sunglasses, and a bandana covering the lower half of his face, he looked just like several other people in the room. Due to social distancing requirements, everyone was seated at least 6 feet apart. The man watched as Jake was wheeled into the courtroom in a wheelchair, with a chain secured around his waist. The lawyers entered and took their seats, and the bailiff ordered everyone to stand as the judge entered the courtroom. Everyone sat back down as the judge nodded, already taking a seat at the high table. The man watched as the lawyers made arguments, counter-arguments, and motions, followed by counter-motions. The judge listened carefully and said very little. To the person in the back row, it all sounded like the meaningless noise from an old Charlie Brown cartoon, a kind of gibberish with few actual words in it. However, he understood the judge's latest order well. The motion to reschedule is granted, the judge said. Marvin stood up to object, but the judge slammed his gavel down. The meeting has been adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, he said. Everyone is free. Marvin threw his papers on the table in front of him, annoyed, while Jake smirked. The guards came to take him away, and no one noticed how the man had already left the hall. Also, no one noticed how the man stood at the intersection of 2 corridors, observing the interaction between Jake and his guards. Damn it, I need to go to the bathroom, Jake said. One of the guards shook his head and signaled to the other to check the toilet. The second guard entered, looked around, looked under the large booth at the end, and, seeing no one, went back out. No one noticed how a tall man in a baseball cap left the building. Everything is clear, said the second guard. Jake looked at the first guard. Get these chains off me before I shit myself, okay? Jake demanded. I'm in a wheelchair, damn it. I'm not going anywhere. Just give me some privacy for a few minutes. Okay, okay, the first guard replied, removing the chains. Just don't be late. Yeah, Jake said as he pulled into the restroom. After the door closed, Jake headed to the large handicapped stall at the end of the restroom. He pulled up to open the stall door and pulled inside. He closed the stall door and was surprised to see a tall man wearing a baseball cap, dark glasses, and a bandana standing in the corner. He wondered why this man was wearing an old apron, latex gloves, and blue shoe covers. Something inside Jake snapped when he realized who was in front of him. He also recalled that the man once told him, "If you ever lay a hand on Lisa or hurt anyone in my family, I swear to God I will find you like a dog and kill you." The blood drained from Jake's face and his eyes widened in horror as he realized he was about to die. He tried to say something, but couldn't. The pressure in his chest suddenly increased, and he could no longer breathe. The man watched as Jake raised his hand to his chest and struggled to take in his last breath of air. But that breath never came. Jake slumped in his chair, losing consciousness. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The glass eye in his mangled left socket reminded him of something out of an old sci-fi movie. He put his sunglasses back on and turned around. Bent over, he jumped to the ledge at the bottom of the high window and climbed onto it. He opened the window slightly to look around the garbage-strewn alley. Making sure that there was no one nearby, he climbed out, quietly closed the window, and silently jumped to the ground. Following a pre-planned route, he got rid of his apron, hat, shoe covers, glasses, and gloves, throwing them into storm drains along the way. After about 15 minutes, the guards at the restroom doors decided that Jake had been given enough time to finish his business. "I swear to God he does this every time we're here," one of the guards said. "Go there and get him out of here." "Okay," replied the second guard. A few seconds later, he returned. "Call 911. We need an ambulance now," he said. "What?" asked the first guard. He turned on the microphone and made a call, heading inside. When he approached the booth, he saw Jake's lifeless body on the floor. "Couldn't have happened to a more deserving person," he said, addressing no one in particular. When paramedics arrived, he headed to the security room to see if anything unusual had been recorded. If anyone had been near this part of the building, it would have been recorded by the CCTV system. Unfortunately for him, the security system was not working at that moment, and no video was recorded from this part of the building. Upgrades and maintenance were being carried out, he was told, all in preparation for any possible disturbances that might occur that night, or the next day. Damn it, he thought. He returned to the restroom and saw paramedics carrying Jake's body out on a stretcher, covered with a white sheet. "He didn't make it," one of the paramedics said. "We'll take him to a pathologist for an autopsy, but we're pretty sure it was a heart attack." The guard nodded in understanding. Ryan got into his rental sedan, noticing that he still had a few minutes left on the parking meter. He put the eye patch back on, put on his old hat, and lit a cigarette, taking a deep breath and silently thanking God that he didn't have to kill Jake. When he finished, he realized he had a few more things to do before heading back to Bob and Sarah's house. Half an hour later, he pulled up to the parking lot of the rehabilitation center where Lisa was. He knew from Sarah that she would be here for a while, undergoing therapy. He also knew that Lisa would have serious speech problems and her ability to use her arms and legs would be limited. However, he also knew that she would understand everything he said. He took the DVD lying on the seat and got out of the car. He walked inside and was directed to her room. Lisa perked up when she saw him and opened her mouth to say something, but he shook his head. "Don't say anything, Lisa," he said. "Just listen." She looked depressed and nodded slightly. He rolled a chair to her bed and looked at her. She was once so beautiful and full of life. All this has now disappeared. "You know, you almost tricked me," he said, causing her to look at him in surprise. "I almost believed what you told me. I have to admit, the food was a great gimmick. It almost worked. And the phone was nice too. Did you know that Elmer cloned him and filled him with spyware? She shook her head. The problem is, Lisa, I don't believe you, he continued. I can never trust a word you say again. That's what cheating and lying do. He paused to give her time to process what she had heard before continuing. When I heard that you were wounded, I immediately came. What I learned after that just killed me, he continued. Then I learned that your own board of directors, along with Jake, hired a hitman to take you out. Her eyes widened. I take it you didn't know they were trying to eliminate you, right? Well, Elmer made a huge mistake. He threatened Sarah, Bob, and little Ryan. He also told me about your adventures. Not only did you cheat on me with Jake, but you cheated on the whole damn board of directors. And this started long before you said you were in a relationship with Jake. He threw the DVD onto her bedspread. This is in case you get bored, Ryan added. According to Elmer, this disc contains the highlights of your career as the corporate bitch for Night Petroleum. Yes, I saw everything, he said. And Bob and Sarah too. He paused to let her process this before continuing. She's not very happy with you right now, especially since you plan to involve her in your wicked lifestyle. Lisa lowered her head and tears rolled down her cheeks. Elmer orchestrated the kidnapping of Sarah and little Ryan, Ryan added. Did you know anything about this? She looked up, surprised, and shook her head. They are safe now, he said. Not thanks to you. But it appears that Night Petroleum no longer has a board of directors, and the FBI told me that they found mountains of evidence of crimes committed by your company. I don't know if you were involved in this. She shook her head and silently whispered, no, but Ryan continued. So far, they haven't found any direct evidence linking you to these crimes, but that doesn't mean they won't find it, Ryan said. Even if they don't charge you for the crimes committed by Elmer, Jake, and the board of directors, you could be charged as an accessory. If I were you, I'd hire a lawyer to negotiate the deal. Maybe you will be given immunity if you agree to cooperate with the investigation. In any case, Night Petroleum is practically non-existent now. You should also know that a class action lawsuit has been filed against Jake and/or his estate. It turns out that I am not the only one of the hundreds of men whose lives and marriages he destroyed. I'm not a lawyer, so don't ask me to explain all the details, but my lawyer back home is also a member of the bar in this state, and he found a loophole in the law that makes this lawsuit possible, Ryan continued. I wouldn't be planning any trips to the French Riviera anytime soon if I were you. By the time they're done, Jake won't have a cent left. Even if his lawyers win the case, he will go bankrupt paying their bills. She looked at him and tears streamed down her face. I'm so sorry, she croaked. Ryan nodded. Yeah, well, for a couple of dollars that might get you a cup of coffee somewhere, he said, causing even more tears to fall. But right now, it doesn't mean anything to me. You once asked if we could remain friends. The answer is no. I can never be friends with a traitor, a liar, a hypocrite, and a cheater. Plus, I met a wonderful woman, and we are getting married soon. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of him hugging Beverly. Her body shook, and she began to sob. She's beautiful, isn't she? Ryan asked. Her name is Beverly, and she made me feel better and more alive than I have ever felt in my life. I thought I could never love another woman again until she came along. You know, she helped save Sarah and little Ryan. Sarah even started calling her Mom, and little Ryan seems to love her too. I think she will be a wonderful grandmother. What do you think? Lisa's body shook with sobs. He pushed back his chair and stood up. You probably won't see me again, he said, and I suspect Sarah and Bob will disown you too, he added as she began to cry. It sucks to lose everything, doesn't it? But you know what they say, karma's a bitch. And then the bill comes. Enjoy the rest of your miserable existence. Goodbye. He put his hat back on and left the room. He heard her moaning as he walked down the hallway and saw the nurses rush to her room. He didn't care and continued walking to his rental car. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click.